So fun. The real question is whether anyone is actually going to watch this.
I mean, it's gonna live on your channel for a really long time.
That's true.
So, hopefully, we might not have anybody join us live right now, but people can go back and watch. I think it's gonna be filled with a lot of really good stuff.
I agree. I agree. This is a fun topic. I don't know. We've talked lots of marketing and craft things before, but romance is a new topic that I don't think we've covered yet. So that's
Yeah.
exciting.
And I am really excited to talk about this because today is Valentine's Day.
I know.
So the topic felt really fitting. Also, we have been doing these. This is not our first pub paths. I guess we should
Mhm.
clarify. We've been doing them on Instagram. The
Yes.
issue with Instagram is that they can get buried really quick in like the reels, so they don't stick around for quite as long. And every single time we would do it on Instagram, we would have issues with the platform working.
Yeah.
So
Yep. YouTube is already proving to be much more efficient on that side of things. So
yeah. Okay.
okay,
Do
well,
you want to
should
dive in?
we? Yeah, should we introduce each other ourselves? I guess first.
Yeah, we can introduce ourselves. We can introduce each other. This is Alex, who is an amazing author, and her debut novel, Blood Beneath the Snow, comes out March, 13th, I want to say?
11th.
11th. March 11th. It is about a princess who gets kidnapped by her enemy kingdom's most powerful general, and he's going to train her to fight her brothers in this challenge to the death. And he wants her to win because whoever wins gets to be on the throne. So,
Yes.
and she will not say it, but it's coming out from Ace. She got like a 6-figure deal from Ace, which is a pretty big deal. So she would not say that she's a big fish, but she's a big fish.
Well, you're very kind. So now it's my turn to do you. Okay, this is Sarah Marie Page, the lovely author of Illusion of Stars, which is her debut romantasy. It's a little so the premise is I think it's so fun. It's this girl who is a healer who has to become a spy who is spying on the enemy general of like her country's enemy. And so she is trying to spy on him to learn all of their country's secrets, but she's not a very good spy. He very quickly figures this out, and then they end up falling for each other. And drama ensues, of course, because no book is good without drama. And Sarah's book is currently on submission to traditional publishing houses, which is very exciting. You just had your best month of reads 6 months after the book came out, which I think is so cool. And yeah, you're working on the sequel. All good
Mhm.
stuff.
Yes.
Awesome. Okay, well, I guess let's jump right in.
Hey, so I mean, we were talking a little bit about this yesterday. We were talking about ways to build romantic tension, and that there are really two different ways. Well, we'll start with the two that we came up with. We are not um experts in any means, but we do read a lot and read a lot of like craft books and like study this. So the first way is emotional intimacy and like building emotional intimacy, and then there's also like building physical intimacy as well. So Alex, let's put a big spotlight on you. How
Okay.
did you work on building? Do you want to talk about physical intimacy or emotional intimacy first?
Good question. Let's just start with emotional intimacy. I feel like we said that one first. So,
Okay.
okay. Good question. So in my novel, that's a romantasy, I think a lot of the emotional intimacy between the characters, it comes from the fact that they they come from different places and they should hate each other based on like their life circumstances and their duty and who they are and what they are like should are told they should be doing. But a lot of the emotional intimacy comes from the fact that they understand each other a lot more intimately than anyone else does. They both feel very alone. They both feel like the duty that they have is keeping them away from being able to live like a full life. They see themselves as, set apart, as not really having a ton of friends. Like they have friends, but nobody really gets them until they meet each other and they realize, oh, we might be living very differently, but we still understand each other in a way that nobody else can. That was something that I tried to play up really big to make sure that when they did eventually decide to get together, that connection between them felt more than just surface level. So, yeah, that's something that I played into a lot, was taking their different circumstances and then looking at them, like taking a step back from the characters and asking myself, how are they the same? Like, even though their lives look different, what are they feeling that they don't like feeling, that the other person is feeling too, that they can relate to each other on? So I think that was a big way that I tried to build emotional intimacy in the relationship between them. What about you?
Yeah, well, like what you were saying, it's kind of like in real life. So in real life, like what do you do when you're trying to get to know somebody is you start looking for connection.
Mhm.
And I don't know if you have ever talked to somebody and you're like, we are just like not like clicking. Like some people you talk to and you click right away and you're like, we have such good like chemistry and energy. And then some people you're like, oh my gosh, it's like getting to know you and talking with you is like pulling teeth.
Yeah.
And a lot of times, like the people that you click with right away are people who you are finding those commonalities with, and that you can find, shared experiences or shared emotions. And I loved how you talked about how you looked at it and like what emotions were they sharing. And you went down to like the grassroots, like emotional level. And you were like, okay, it's not just that, you know, um, he comes from, you go beyond like it's not just that they come from like a similar culture because they're from different countries, and it's not that they have like the same like family back. It's that they feel these like very like human emotions, and this is like the dominant emotion that they're feeling right now, and they can relate to each other in feeling alone. So one of the things, like piggybacking off of that,
Mhm.
is in Illusion of Stars, both Izzy and Eric, neither of them really felt like they are good enough. And I almost took it, um, you know, I took them and I made them as opposite as possible while also trying to like find the similarity. So Eric, the love interest in Illusion of Stars, is like the most powerful like illusion magic caster in the enemy army. He's like very attractive, he's very powerful. And Isabel, on the other hand, is not. She's totally ordinary and she doesn't have magic, and she's like a little bit, she's kind of awkward, and has a lot of like social anxiety. And so um you know, I don't even want to say like she's not like other girls for like a trope, because she's exactly like everybody else. Like she's very, very
Mhm.
normal.
Yeah.
Um, and she feels this intense like lack of like not being good enough. And that's her thing. She's like, I do not feel like, if there was a measuring stick, and she's always trying to measure herself with this measuring stick, and she's like, I always come up short.
Mhm.
Well, you also have somebody who is like the best of the best, and how much pressure is he under to maintain that and to like exceed and to perform? And like if he fails, he's letting down the entire army. And so he also feels like he is like not good enough, and there's a measuring stick, and it's not good enough. And so like they related to each other on that emotional level. But another thing that I really wanted to do was to have them fill each other's like wounds. So they both had this emotional wound of not feeling like they're good enough. And
Yeah.
I needed them to be able to look at each other and say, you know, you matter not because of your magic, but because of who you are. And then, he looks at Isabel and he says, yeah, you're not like a good spy and you don't have magic and you're not good at a lot of things, but he sees what she is good at, because she is an incredibly good physician. So she's a good doctor, and she also like makes friends like wherever she goes, and everybody just like loves Isabel, and he like sees that in her. And so they're both like filling each other's like emotional wounds. And that that creates the intimacy. There's a scene that I really love towards the end of Illusion of Stars where I was like, what is the weirdest thing that I can have her be doing? So I came up with it like in context and I just took her down to like the most like crazy possible thing that I could possibly think of. And then I had him walk in on her doing that thing. And he just like gives her this look that's like so full of love. So anyways, that's the emotional intimacy and that's how I built it. So
Yeah, no, I love that. I think you talked about, the emotional wounds of characters. That is something that I love. It makes me think about I had like a craft book I was going to talk about, but I put it out of reach. Let me grab it. Okay, so I think you have read this too, but Romancing the Beat by Gwen Hayes. It's this teeny tiny craft book. If you write romance of any kind, I absolutely think that you have to read this. This book goes so deep into the idea of every character having one, like their biggest emotional wound. And part of what makes a romance arc so satisfying in a novel is seeing that wound begin to heal because of something that the love interest teaches them. Whether that, ends up leading to a happy ending or not, I think it makes an emotional romance arc a lot more satisfying. I think too about like your characters have to have something in common because you mentioned like in real life that's what we look for is commonalities in people. That's how we learn whether or not we vibe with people. So I don't know, I think there's like commonalities in emotional wounds. I think there's commonalities in interests. And I think another one is commonality, like identical motivations. I think too, like the unlikely team up of two people trying to reach the same goal, that can really bring characters together too, even if they maybe have different emotional wounds or different interests. So yeah, I don't know. I think about like I'm trying to think of a good example. I pulled out a couple of books here. Um, yeah, I don't know if any of those work. I'm like, I can't think of an example off the top of my head, but just like an unlikely team up of characters who realize, okay, we might be different and we might not like the other person, but we're trying to get to the same thing. I think that can really build emotional intimacy too, as characters go from that surface level of let's just get this done to a deeper like, okay, well, if we have to get this done, there's no one else I would rather be doing it with. So I don't know. I think that's something that can help too if you need to bring your characters together in a more emotionally intimate way. So, I don't know.
yeah. What about physical intimacy? So what did you try to do to build physical intimacy between your characters?
That's a good question. This is something that in my first round of developmental edits that I did with my editor at Ace, I had to go through and like really take there's like a big section in Act 2 where my two main characters are just like sequestered together alone by themselves, and that's where a lot of their relationship and their romance arc like builds. And I remember my editor came in and was like, okay, there's some physical intimacy happening between these characters, but I want it to be elevated. I want it to feel more real. How can we like take this to another level? Because it can be a little hard and a little weird to think about like, okay, these characters are physically attracted to each other. How do I put that on the page? So I had to really step back. I what helped me the most was reading contemporary romance actually, because in fantasy romance, romantasy, enough of it is still fantasy that I felt like sometimes I would miss the most important parts of the romance. In contemporary romance books, I found that I wasn't struggling as much because the setting was real already to me and I understood it a lot better. So it was easier for me to sit down and say, okay, as I'm reading this contemporary romance book, how do these characters act when they start noticing each other? Not emotionally, but physically, because I think there's a lot of different ways that relationships play out. Sometimes there are people who feel the emotional intimacy first and then they're interested physically. Sometimes it's physical and then the emotional comes into play. So I don't know. Something I tried to do was I started taking my characters and sticking them in the same room in like ways that they could not get away from each other and they were forced to interact. And I started asking myself, what would they do? Like if they're attracted to each other, what would happen here? So it started with little things like just the way they talked to each other and the way that they interacted was it I don't know, because beneath the surface level there was always something more happening. I had to get to know the characters really well and ask myself too, because they're enemies to lovers, I really had to think about specifically, um, like if this character started having feelings for someone that they shouldn't, would they like lean into that, or would they try and stop themselves, or would they just straight run away? Every character I think has a different reaction in that scenario. So I had to really kind of dig deep and ask myself, where are they at when they start? And then eventually the goal is to get them to a point where they kiss or something. Like how do I get them from point A to point B of, oh my gosh, I'm having feelings for someone I shouldn't, so I'm going to run away, versus okay, I'm still having those feelings, but it's been a while and now I'm going to lean into it instead of running. So I think like I really just had to sit and do a lot of thinking and I do a lot of daydreaming as part of my process where like I have ideas for scenes and I'll write down my ideas and then I just sit there and kind of like I try to play them like a movie in my head a little bit. That's really helpful because then if I get stuck, I can just rewind and start over and see where they go. Um, so one scene that I added that was supposed to really help like the physical intimacy of it all was the characters who are enemies, they take this trip to like help her build a sword. She needs a better weapon, so they're literally learning how to like forge this weapon, and it gets really hot. So the enemy takes his shirt off. Like he's obviously being kind of like trying to get under her skin because he likes her, but she does not know that yet. She just thinks, "Wow, this guy's like so annoying. I absolutely hate him." And as they're doing that, I just had the thought of like, well, obviously she needs to think like she thinks he's attractive. That's something that is just undeniable for her. So, but she can ignore it when he's wearing all of his clothes. It's very easy to ignore. When he takes his shirt off, it's a lot less easy for her to push that out of her brain. So that was like my first attempt to kind of put them in a situation where they were forced to acknowledge, oh, I have physical attraction to this person. What am I going to do about it? And kind of move on from there. So, yeah, I don't know. What about you? What did you do in Illusion to kind of up that physical intimacy?
I did a lot of in the rewriting stage to try and like nail like the physical intimacy. And it was kind of like one of those. I was really good at the emotional intimacy piece. And Illusion of Stars has very good emotional intimacy, but I like to think about them as almost a braid. And so, as you know, at the very beginning, they're like over here and they're not being emotionally intimate and they're not really being physically intimate because they're not together. Slowly, as they become more emotionally intimate, you also want to like start bringing in that physical intimacy. One of the things that helped me was like focusing in on like the little details of like the touches and the little details of, because if it's first person POV, which Illusion of Stars is, like the things that your character is the one that's filtering the world and filtering the story. And so they're going to point out the things that are important to them that they see. And so, if his like, he like goes to touch her and his hands like his fingers like just like kind of like brush her hand a little bit, like a little bit of a Darcy touch, and she like picks up on that. um I really like the little touches and stuff like that. So
Yeah, it makes me think of I just remember like being in college and meeting my spouse for the first time and having a crush on them, and like, I remember we were in a class together and I would kind of, like, watch them because I wanted to see if they were watching me back, like, that and whenever I would catch them looking at me, I was like, "Oh," like, yes, it just kind of fed into all of it. So, it was, like, little things that just slowly built. I like what you said about emotional and physical intimacy kind of being a braid of, like, if your characters start very distant and, like, okay, maybe they have a moment of emotional intimacy and that brings them, like, a step closer, and then maybe like that step closer they feel comfortable with like casual touch, and then so they start casually like being able to touch, and then the next step is they have another moment of emotional intimacy, and oh, okay, well now this casual touch might mean something more because this emotional intimacy has brought us closer together, and I'm starting to realize that. And so then the characters take another step of like, well, if this physical intimacy, if this casual touch really has like underlying meaning, then like I want you to care for who I am as a person too. So I'm going to open up a little bit more. And it's just like the slow, like they step to each other, like emotional intimacy, physical intimacy, and they kind of like follow each other along the line. I think that's a really good point.
Yeah, and I also think so interestingly, I read a lot of like craft books and a lot of them are like very like niche and bizarre craft books. Like sometimes I pick stuff up because I'm like, what is going on with this one? So I read a book about how to write erotica that was published in the 1970s. And this is funny because illusionists fade to black. Like there is
Yeah.
no open door sex in the published version of Illusion of Stars. Um, they talked about though, like the difference with like erotica specifically is, um, they start out and it starts out like very physical, like right away. Like they're like
Mhm.
on each other from like the first chapter. And then, the thing that, with a regular romance, you're kind of like withholding like the the pinnacle of the relationship, like whatever that looks like you're withholding like the kiss or you're withholding like whatever like I'm trying to think of a better word. You're withholding like the pinnacle of the relationship. I don't know. You're withholding like the finale.
There we go.
Like either the kiss or like if they do it, like that is the thing that keeps people like reading. And then once they like get together, it's a little bit harder to keep that like tension. Well, in erotica, you start out and you're not withholding like the physical like finale of like the kiss or whatever that is going to be. Um, you you know you have to find something else, and so they talked about how in that particular genre, usually you look at it and you're like, okay, well, this romance is temporary. Like, why can't they be together for longer? Like, they're really into each other. And like, what is like the end point on this? And like, why can't they be together like long term? Or like, and that's kind of how you create that tension. And so there are like a lot of different ways that, like a traditional romance, I think about like kind of like a braid with the physical intimacy and emotional intimacy, but there are other structures and other like methods that you can use. Like, if you're like, hey, I want to write a romance book and my couple is already together. Like what do I do? How do I deal with that? Or you're writing a book and it's about like a married couple, boyfriend or girlfriend or something that and you want kind of the romance as a subplot. There are other ways that you can create that tension. Um, and so looking at like what is like the barrier, like what is the thing that I am like withholding from the audience to like create that tension, whether or not that's like the kiss, or whether or not that's, putting like a big deadline on their relationship and saying, they are going to be torn apart. So
Yeah. No, I think that's a really good point. Like the whole arc has to be working towards something. It can't just be a smooth like start to finish relationship. That's not quite as interesting without that conflict. I think about how when I started writing fantasy, all of the things that I was reading, like all of the craft tips and things like that, and things about how to write a query letter, it was all information that was telling me that the most important thing was the stakes. What would happen if the characters could not save the world? That would be so devastating. Like what exactly does that look like? How specific can you get? And I think too that that applies to relationship arcs and romance arcs in any genre, whether it be contemporary romance or romantasy or even fantasy with like a small romance side plot. The relationship arc, if you want it to be an arc and actually like have that kind of pull in the plot, then there have to be stakes. It has to be, okay, well, what happens if everything does not work out? Because I think too about, I don't know, it's a genre convention of romance that these characters will get a happily ever after. You don't pick up a romance book and think, I can't wait for all of these characters to have terrible endings and never see each other again. At least I don't. I pick up a romance book thinking, I'm really excited to figure out how these two characters at the beginning end up coming to their happy conclusion at the end. You already go in kind of knowing what you're getting. And so a lot of what keeps people hooked from beginning to end is the suspense of how could this possibly work out when there are so many things keeping them apart or keeping them from really being together in a more truthful way, I guess. So, yeah, I think that's interesting to think about too.
Yeah, I love the idea of, like, looking at, like, the stakes of the relationship, like, what happens if they don't get together? It kind of reminds me of a craft book that I read once, and I don't remember which one it's from, I've read a lot. But they talked about how the stakes are always death. And you're like, but, whoa, whoa, whoa. Like, not always, like, is somebody gonna die at the very end? But they talked about how there's different types of death, right? So there's, like, physical death, which is what we normally think of when we think death. There's also, like, professional death, like death of your professional career. There's, like, an identity death, like death of, like, who you are, piece of your identity. And so, like, what is the like, what do they stand to lose if they can't get together? And I would say, like, look at it beyond just, like, like, ideally they're feeling each other's wound. And so I think with romance, a lot of times you're looking at it kind of from, like, an identity, like death. Like, if your character is just used to being so alone, and that is kind of the wound that she needs filled, is she needs somebody to be there with her so that she feels less alone. The death there, I think, would be, um, you know, maybe like a social death, or like death of like a piece of like a core. I don't know. Now I'm just kind of like spitballing, but are you on my wavelength? Like, do you
Yeah,
get
I
it?
think so. I think so. I don't
Okay.
know. It's making sense to me.
Okay.
Um,
Um,
okay, well, I know we had also thought about talking about, I guess, spice in romance versus romance without spice. Obviously, you have written a book that is closed door, so there is no on page explicit sex, I guess, to just be frank. My book does feature open door scenes with spice, and I think still there's hmm, a lot of, I guess, opposite people, like ends. I can't think of the word. Uh,
it's divisive.
it's
Like,
divisive.
whether or not you write like an open door romance, or whether or not it's closed door, like that tends to be divisive. There's a lot of like debate over it, and a lot of sides, like, I feel like people on both sides, which I hate, kind of get this like holier than thou attitude. Like, and I've seen it from the no spice readers, and I've seen it from the spice readers, like, um yeah, so I totally, I do feel like you and I, though, like, are kind of similar in that you're like, okay, what is this story? Like, what is this particular story and this particular relationship need? And making sure that you are having like a finale to, like, the buildup that you have created. So, if it's going back to our braid like theory, and you're braiding the emotional intimacy and the physical intimacy, you're building towards something, and you want like a satisfying like conclusion to that, or else your readers are going to be like, whoa, whoa, whoa. So it's like, what are you promising? And you can kind of like make those promises to your reader like early on, like what type of story this is going to be,
Mhm.
through, like how fast you're like doing the braid. Like, maybe if the finale of this relationship is like just a kiss, like, you're gonna spend a lot more time on like the hand touching and like the like holding hands, versus like if you're like finale and what you're building towards is like them getting together in the bedroom for like an open door scene. You might go through those things a little bit more, and spend, and move through that, because there's you know for you to go. So, but you want to make sure, I think, regardless, that you're bringing it to a satisfying conclusion for your
Mhm.
readers.
Definitely. I think too that like characters, if you don't want them to just be cardboard cutouts of people that you're putting them together and saying kiss, yeah, that doesn't usually go well. With you've got these really fleshed out characters, then often they will come with their own previous relationship experience. They'll come with ideas and thoughts and feelings and opinions about romance in their own life and how they think it should look versus how it actually looks. And so I think you're right that that can kind of tell your reader from the beginning kind of what they're looking for. I think about in my book that has an open door scene, you learn very early on about the main character's past relationship and like kind of how far it went physically. And so we've established from a very early point that like that's a step she's willing to take in her relationships. That's a step that she's interested in, that she feels she's at a maturity level for. And I think too that, like that just kind of came part and parcel with who she was as a character. And because of that, by the time their relationship, as I was writing it and editing it and trying to build it toward a satisfying conclusion, it felt very natural to me that they would have that kind of physical intimacy because like you mentioned, it's braided so directly with the emotional intimacy. It's a physical way to symbolize how much they have grown to trust each other. At least for my book, I think that really fit. And so I don't know, I think too it depends a lot on the characters and what they're interested in and willing to do and move forward with and what they're looking for. I think that it's just kind of along those lines too. If you're writing teenage characters, they're going to want different things than adult characters in some instances. So yeah, it depends a lot on the characters themselves too.
Yeah. Do you have so I feel like we could do a part 2 and talk more about
Okay.
romance, but I feel like we're at 30 minutes, which is pretty
Yeah.
good. So do you have any concluding thoughts before we go? And then yeah, maybe we'll do a part 2 because we didn't even really talk about like universal
Yeah.
fantasies or anything like that. So
That's true. Okay, I don't have any like real final thoughts, but I picked four romance books off my shelf to recommend to everyone for Valentine's Day that I think have really good romance in them. So there's The Cruel Prince. That's like your classic YA enemies to lovers. It's not, I wouldn't go as far as to call it romantasy because there's a lot more fantasy in this than romance. But the enemies to lovers is like if you're trying to figure out how to write good enemies to lovers, you just have to read this book because they literally despise each other and then they end up falling in love. So I don't know. I feel like I learned a lot from that book. Iris Kelly Doesn't Date. This is one of my favorite sapphic romances. It's contemporary. It's the third in like a series of interconnected standalones. So you can read it by itself, but there are two before it that are a lot of fun too. And it's fake dating. Fake dating will get me every single time. I'll pick up any book that has fake dating in it, just straight up. Um, okay, The Dead Romantics by Ashley Poston. I think this one is great because she's a person who sees ghosts and he is a ghost. And so there's that level of like, eventually they get to a point where they want to be together, but they cannot touch physically. And that adds a whole different level of stakes and like, I have to keep reading. I have to figure out how they figure this out. Anyway, that one's really good. And then the last one is Not Another Love Song by Julie Soto. This book is the ultimate, like, I don't know, I call this the horniest book that I've ever read. I think that stands true. Like, they want each other physically so badly before they get to a point where they are, like, on the same page emotionally. So, I don't know. Those are my recommendations if you're looking for romances to read that will help you improve your romance writing. So, yeah.
I love those recommendations. Also, Blood Beneath the Snow by Alexander Kennington comes out March 11th, and it will be in all of the bookstores and all the big retailers. So that's another one.
I would also add Illusion of Stars by Sarah Marie Page to my list. It's like I have some of my books stacked horizontally, like the Hunger Games right there. Illusion of Stars is towards the bottom of like a big horizontal stack, so I can't grab it right now, or else my entire bookshelf is just gonna like fall over. But pretend that I'm holding it right here. Maybe we can Photoshop it in later or something. I
Yeah.
don't think that's a real thing, but
But yeah, I do feel like the YouTube, like I said, we've done this on Instagram and have been doing this on Instagram. This is our first time doing it on YouTube. I feel like YouTube was a much better platform for this. So we will be back with another one. Maybe part two for romance, maybe something else. We'll talk about it behind the scenes. But yeah, thanks for tuning in, guys.
yeah, awesome. See you next time. Bye, guys.